I just calculated the cost of my journey from medical school graduate to consultant in the UK. And the number is, well, let's just say it's more than some people's annual salary. Nobody talked to me about this when I was 17, filling out my applications to medical school. And even when you finish, no one really tells you about the cost that you might have to have out of pocket in order to just maintain your career. So I'm going to break down every fee that you have to pay compulsorily as a doctor in the UK, cost of building my CV in order to specialize and train as a consultant anaesthetist. Because whether you're a medical student or a resident doctor, or you're just curious about what it takes to become a consultant in the UK, this is probably information that you need to know. So stick around to the end because I'm going to tell you the final number and I'm going to give you some tips on how you can keep that number down and some tips for how you can spread those costs through your training. I'm Dr. Nix, a consultant anaesthetist, and I help doctors and experts grow their income and their impact using the skills that you already have. And once you see these numbers, you'll understand exactly why that's important. Now, before we get into the numbers, I do need to explain some things to some of our friends who are not from the UK. And so when you finish medical school here, what happens is you go into foundation training, and that is the equivalent to an internship or in the old system, housemanship and your first SHO year. So the foundation years are divided into F1 and F2. Then you apply for specialty training. If you remember my video from Canada, you'll know that in Canada and in America, people go straight into the specialty that they want. But in the UK, you have to do 2 years first of general training. Now, at each stage, there are costs for like exams that you have to do. I'm going to walk you through exactly what I spent at each level, and you can decide for yourself whether these costs are reasonable for training, career progression. So in order for this to be in the right context, I need you to take your minds back to 2013 to 2015, which is where I was a foundation doctor. First thing was GMC registration, and that is the General Medical Council fees, and they are the regulating body for all doctors within the UK. So in the first year, I paid £185, and then once I was fully registered, I paid £390. In addition, I had to pay indemnity insurance, and that is essentially, it's just professional liability in case somebody decides to sue you, and I paid £120 over the foundation years. At the time, I didn't really know what I wanted to go into. I was exploring obs and gynae. Maybe I wanted to be competitive if I wanted to go into medicine. And so I did some courses in order to help me with that. Now, when you're a foundation doctor, advanced life support is compulsory, so I paid £450 for that. But because I was thinking about anaesthetics, I also paid for ATLS and APLS, which cost me £550 and £650 because they gave you more points for when you applied into specialty training. I presented work at 3 different conferences, one of which was in Ireland, and all the costs of that were £2,075. And like I said, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I did the membership exam for the Royal College of Physicians, Part 1, and that cost me £419. Some revision resources, obviously, that I used to make sure I passed that exam cost me £300. And when you are applying for specialty training in the UK, you get points for being a teacher or trainer. And so I paid for a trainer's course, which cost me about £200. And I did a surgical training course because I wanted to do obs and gynae and wanted to improve my skills, and paid £500 for that. Again, because I was considering surgery, I became a member of the Association for Surgeons in Training, which cost me about £120. And then for the BMA membership, which is basically our union in the UK, I paid £120. So in total, my foundation year's training cost me £4,800, which was the equivalent to about 2 months' salary at the time, because when I was in F1, I was earning £1,900 per month after tax. And F2, I think it was like 2,200 or 2,300. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was about that. Can't tell you what it was before tax, but that's what it was after tax. Now, I kind of figured out what I wanted to do pretty soon. So I did spend money on like surgical stuff and medical stuff, but not too much, because I luckily got to what I wanted to do very quickly, and I could, double down and just pay for the anesthetic courses and things that bolstered my CV in that way. So do you think it was worth it? I think for me, I think it was a pretty lean cost for foundation years, but it did get me into anesthetic training. I gone into core training, which is the first 2 years of your specialty training. It's a bit weird in the UK. You don't just do run through, you do 2 years and then you have to reapply for higher training. So I got into core training, and that cost £4,800 from the calculations that I've done. When you get into core training, there's some compulsory exams you need to complete in order to get to the next level. And those exams cost me the following. Part 1 of the primary fellowship for the Royal College of Anaesthetists, which is the boards. I guess if you're in America, it's the equivalent for boards. That cost me £325 for the MCQ written portion of the exam. The oral and OSCE portion of the exam cost me £510. I went to a course to facilitate me passing, because everyone said, oh, anaesthetics is so hard to pass, the failure rate is so high. So I went to this infamous course up in Wirral, which is near Liverpool, and the course cost me £700, and I paid about £400 for the accommodation in order to be able to take the course. In addition, the advanced life support that I told you about before, that expires after some years. I think it's 3 or 4 years, can't remember, but I had to do that again. So that's another £450. Then I also did a regional course because I wanted to separate myself. And at the time, doing regional was like this special thing. Now most people do it, but at the time it was a bit special. So I went to a course. I got it as a discount because I knew the organizer of the course. And so I paid £400 instead of £600. Some networking saved me £200 there. To ensure that I got into the higher portion of the training, I also applied to do a PG cert in medical education. Paid £3,000 for that at a university, but with all my night shifts and long days, I missed the deadline for the assignment, and so basically they kicked me off the course without a refund. So that's £3,000 down the drain. So that was a huge mistake for me, but you know what, we live and we learn. In addition to the Mersey course, I also did an oral course, which cost me £500, aside from the written course. So in total, my core training cost me about £6,000. And then I made it straight into registrar training. So again, comment, do you think it was worth it? Do you think I should have spent less or spent more? I made it straight into registrar training. Now, if you're not from the UK, just to explain, if you don't make it into registrar training, then you just work jobs in non-training posts and then you reapply. Okay, now registrar training is the equivalent of residency in America. That's kind of like the last stretch before you become a consultant. In these years, you then, as an anaesthetist anyway, you then do the final part of the fellowship of the Royal College of Anaesthetists, which certifies you as an anaesthetist. So I had to take another exam, which the written portion cost me £510. I failed it the first time, so I had to repeat that. So that was £1,020 in total. The oral portion also cost £510. Of course, I went to another course to make sure that I passed the exam, and that cost me about £1,350 in total. Whilst you're a registrar, you kind of have to prove that you're really interested in stuff, and so I was a member of the AAGBI, which is the Association for Anaesthetists in Great Britain and Ireland, and that cost me about £100 in total. I went to a couple of courses, basic courses for like £50 in different things that I had interest in, another £100. And I presented my work at international conferences, which give you points for when you are applying for jobs. And so I went to Thessaloniki in Greece. That cost me £1,250. I went to Amsterdam. That cost me £1,250. And I did various conferences in the UK, in total costing £1,550. So then COVID hit. And the good thing about COVID was that conferences started to be online. It also meant that you didn't have to print out your poster, so that's a reduced cost. You didn't necessarily have to travel to the venue, that reduced costs. And the cost of entry, there was also a cost of a virtual presence at the conference, which was a bit cheaper. Like I said before, I was into regional, so I did the European regional examination, which cost me another £400, and the resources, you you buy study bank questions, which probably cost me another £120. And then remember that ALS? Yep, it expired again. And so I had to do it again. And that cost me £450 for the ALS. And I had to redo APLS. I think I did EPALS instead, and that cost me another £650. EPALS is just the equivalent of APLS, which is basically the European Pediatric Advanced Life Support. So yeah, that was £650, which I'll add to my total. Remember the PG cert in medical education? Yeah, well, I had to do that again, and it cost me £4,000. So that brings my registrar training to a total of £11,570. But the good thing is I did get access to the Health Education England trainee fund. And so I got £1,000 reimbursed, even though I had to pay it out of pocket. I still got it back, which every little helps, I guess. And then, aside from building all your CV, in order to practice in the UK, you have to have ongoing memberships. So with the General Medical Council, like I mentioned before, every single year it goes up. The higher you go in your training, the fee goes up. So I spent approximately £4,500 on that. And then your indemnity also goes up the higher you go. And because I was working at Fulham Football Club, which is outside of the hospital, mine was slightly higher than usual. So that cost me £6,000. So outside of those CV building stuff, you also have to pay fees to the Royal College. So when you're a resident or trainee, you pay an annual fee to the Royal College. So I was paying £330. Then when you pass the exam and you have the FRCA behind your name, you then have to pay £578 for the privilege every single year. Remember, I was a member of the AAGBI. I was a member of SIVA, which is essentially the Society for Intravenous Anesthesia. I think I paid about €40 a year for 5 years, which is about €200. I paid BMA membership. Remember the union that I told you about? So that's £740 in total. And I paid to various organisations to get cheaper conference fees. Anyway, the total of that was about £15,500 in total. So aside from the foundation fees, the core training, the registrar fees, and the ongoing subscription fees, in order to finish your training or get onto the specialist register, you then have to pay a fee, which is £489. You then have to pay a fee to the Royal College, which was £450, and then the indemnity for your first year as a consultant is roughly about £450 if you're not doing any private work. So that took me to a grand total of, just rounded this to the nearest figure, £38,000. Now, why do you need to know this figure? Well, I think it's important if you're an F1 starting today or if you're already in your training, because if we inflation adjust that fee is now around the £50,000 mark. If you add that to your medical school fees, which are £9,250 per year times 6 years, which is what I did because I intercalated, that's another £55,000. And so for someone starting in medical school, you're paying like six figures, £105,000 to go through medical school and through training. But even if we take away the medical school portion of it, you're paying £50,000. This doesn't include textbooks. I didn't include that. It doesn't include travel between hospitals, because you can be in a deanery where one hospital is an hour away or 2 hours away from the other hospital. It doesn't include opportunity costs, and it doesn't include living expenses at university or afterwards. So when you're looking at a six-figure investment just to qualify as a consultant, you can see why building a portfolio career makes so much sense, right? Because your medical training gives you incredible skills. It gives you problem solving, communication, working under pressure, but also it costs quite a bit. That's why I'm passionate about portfolio careers, so you can have extra income. Now, there is a fund that you can access as a trainee, but over my training, it was very difficult to access that fund, and so I only really got back the £1,000 from the PG cert, because you're moving hospitals all the time and they have all these rules that to me just acted as a barrier for you getting those funds. But here's a top tip that you can use. If you are paying out of pocket, you can get a 0% interest card. Put the fees or the conference, anytime you want to pay for a conference or a course or whatever, put it on that card until you get the money back from your deanery or from your hospital. This is exactly why I'm passionate about helping doctors unlock their identity codes and build additional income stream, because it does cost a bit to practice as a doctor in the UK relative to your salary. So to me, diversifying your income isn't just smart, I think it's essential for good financial planning. So for me, the question isn't whether or not you can afford to build alternative income streams or if you have the time to do it. The question is, can you afford not to? If you want a more cost-effective way of getting through your training years to build up your CV, just pop a comment below and I'll make that video. Tell me what your take is on these numbers. If you're watching from another country, let me know how much it costs in your country to practice as a doctor. What are the fees like? What are the training? How much you pay for training, getting into training and specialties and so on and so forth. It'll be so interesting to know what that costs. Now, all of the compulsory fees are tax deductible, so whilst nobody's going to pay you for them, you can claim your tax back on them. Anyway, thanks for watching. It costs 50k, £50,000 to train from being a graduate from medicine to becoming a consultant.